and welcome back to Dominant, in particular episode 4, the final part of our look at the 1990-91 season, a season characterised by the theme of pressure. None more so than its denouement, as Rangers, with a new manager and a lead of only 2 points with 4 games left and not a lot of form with which to speak, tried to get the title over the line. To see us over the line this week, I'm joined by Andy McGowan. How are you, Andy?
I'm very good, Martyn, thank you.
And from Athens, Greece, it's John Cowden, as always. John?
Looking forward to this one.
I bet you are. I'll start off with an apology for the listeners and the sound quality on last week's show, despite doing this for 4, nearly 5 years. Always good to check that your microphone is absolutely plugged in. So apologies for that. I hope you can hear me crystal clear this week. Conscious, gents, that David, Alan and I spent over an hour discussing that incredible and dramatic story in the spring of 91. But the two of you are key parts of this series as well. So I am keen to get your thoughts as concisely as we can on Souness's departure and your recollections of that. But maybe more importantly, your recollections, your thoughts at the time, and the fact that we had replaced this huge figure, some would say saviour, by promoting his assistant. I'll start with you, John, first, please.
On Souness, get him to absolute betrayal.
Okay.
I guess over time it sort of healed, but no, at that point, get him to beat it. I think Murray, as you probably alluded to in previous shows, got it spot on with go now. So absolutely get Souness. And my choice, and I do recall the conversation I had with a boss of mine, was Smith. I was firmly in the Smith camp from pretty early on. My only doubt was he a big enough name to attract who we might like to attract? Actually, that boat had sailed, but we didn't realise. But no, I was fully taking Smith as opposed to the Kaiser, the oil consultant, George Graham, and whoever else was getting bandied about in that time.
Andy, bit younger.
Yeah, 14 years old, but a matter of weeks after a headline screams to the Rangers News, "I'm here for life," or words to that effect. It was a betrayal, as John says. It was the best piece of leadership David Murray ever showed. It proved to be the right thing to do. On Smith, 14-year-old Andy McGowan wasn't quite so convinced because I was still under the allure of the showbiz side of Rangers, which is basically that the world was our oyster. We could have any manager in the world nearly. So Smith was it wasn't high on my list as a 14-year-old, but there was never dissent when that was made because we kind of knew what the man was made of, and probably looking back, we knew he was made of sterner stuff than we probably recognised.
Said at the very end of last week's show that at the very least, this is a continuity appointment. This is someone who the chairman and the players, and I'm going to guess most of the support, at least a large percentage of the support, trusted to get over this particular line. But some of those players who had inside information, because this, as we discussed at great length last week, this imaginary interregnum between Souness going on the Tuesday, Smith being appointed on the Friday, when in fact the agreement was in place by the Saturday before that. Players were aware of that, and they'd sent pals to go and make a few bets and make a bit of money. But some bookies weren't paying out on Smith being the Rangers manager. It was maybe seen as a potential caretaker, potential interim role. Let's see what happens in the summer kind of thing. So they didn't pay out for months, which I think maybe tells its own story. Okay, 4 games to go. Lead of 2 points. The form that had been blistering over the winter was disappearing. And we go to Love Street for that 4th final game. Smith's first. It is still 0-0 as we go into the second half. Aberdeen are 3-0 up at home to Motherwell. So everyone's aware of that. The transistor radios will be buzzing. The players will know that the pressure is intensifying just with every minute. Smith went for that 3-man central defence, something that hadn't been seen since Butcher had left, when Nigel Spackman dropping deeper to support John Brown, Scott Nisbet. Richard Gough was suspended. There was a bit of a jittery spell in that first half, a bit of a toil of a game, but it reached its final quarter. And in an era, as we'll discuss as the weeks go on, where youth development would be sidelined by expensive expediency, it was somewhat ironic that such a crucial and brilliant goal would be scored by a 19-year-old homegrown talent.
With Hurlock, good play by Terry Hurlock. He has Gary Stevens on the right. There's Robertson. Yes, he scored, Rangers!
Andy, I know you were there because we've discussed this before in the time capsule, but we're covering 12 years on this show. By definition, some unsung heroes will fall through the cracks. That's our memory only has so much to go, or to contain. Sandy Robertson's goal, though, Andy, this, in terms of the goals that we will discuss on this show and have discussed, this is huge and I think undervalued.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a good goal. I mean, apart from anything else, it's a cracking goal, inventive and off the cuff, but my recollection that day was, so it's Old Love Street, you've pretty shit for atmosphere, I've got to say. And as the game went on, you just felt the life ebbing away for Rangers, to be honest, because there wasn't a solution forthcoming. And it was just one of the games that was a bit of attrition here and there. And you're staring down the barrel, basically, because you just say Aberdeen are turning up the heat. We've got to change a manager. There's certainly no certainty as to what the outcome of that change of manager is going to be, and you're sitting there thinking, is this how fate decides where we go next? Because basically Smith had 3-4 games to get his whole career on track. And Robertson himself was pretty, I mean, we knew of him, but he was nothing more than a promising youngster. A bit slight, good skill. Was he ever going to be a Durant? Probably not, but you'd hopes for him, and he saved the day. He absolutely saved the day, because he saved more than the day. Actually, he saved our title hopes, because I think if that momentum had swung that day, then we wouldn't have won a show.
I think you may be right, to be honest, and obviously there would be an even more decisive game still to come. John, for all the confidence you spoke about Smith being the man, this was a poor performance, to be honest, and St Mirren really could have put Rangers under even more pressure early on. The jitters were there. I guess, though, given the memories of March and April that we had, it's not really out of keeping. That Rangers team was starting to really fray at the edges, wasn't
it? It was, I guess, and I think in the context of how I felt, because this is one of the, for all of us, is one of the clearest times in terms of not really having to look back into it too much of the reports of the time, because so many things are crystal clear. But this really, I think the reason I would go for Smith, it was as much emotional as anything else. I like a Rangers man as a Rangers manager, and after having, if you like, heartbroken the betrayal of, I know he was a Rangers supporter, but he wasn't a Rangers man. I would never argue. He never fitted into our ethos on that level. And this felt, generational gap, this felt a bit like 77, 78, where we were so far ahead and then Aberdeen came up and we just turned it on, not in a smooth way, but just ground out the results the last 3-4 games. So when Robertson did it, to me, and this will change, it was like an affirmation of, okay, we're not playing great, but we know how to win. We know young guys, unlikely heroes will pop up and do the business and get us over the line. There was almost, given how bad that game was, and there were many bad games at Love Street throughout the 80s, actually, that suddenly you just thought, okay, this has a feeling of familiarity, which gave reassurance. And I mean, Sandy Robertson was a prospect. Could he have done better? Yes, but he was just so many players through the decades who have been really good prospects who go off the rails for lots of reasons, but generally they can't handle it, or they are not handled best themselves. And I think that would apply to him, because this wasn't a one-off performance. I think we mentioned it in previous ones where he did half decent performance in the Old Firm game New Year.
Set up
one or two other things. Yeah, I mean, he wasn't who is this guy? We knew of him. Prospect, where that prospect would end up. It could easily have been Charlie Miller in a year or two time or whatever. You know, he had a certain cockiness, the way he took his goal, the way he set up Haitley. He was a slight figure. It's the past is littered with these young players who were the other, but the odds are that they don't turn out to be a Durant, if you like. There's very few of those kind of players who turn into guys who in the team for a decade.
Was Durant becoming the kind of benchmark then for that? I mean, I know you've made the point quite well, John, that even though the trophies weren't exactly flowing, that the Rangers were producing young players, or at least identifying young players very early and bringing them to the club. And Derek Ferguson, clearly there was hopes for, but by this time, you know, his chances long gone. I think he had more chances than he maybe deserved, to be honest. But Durant, especially when it's cruelly taken away, and he's returning, you know, he scores in Souness's final game, of course. Is that the benchmark then for any of these young Rangers players kind of coming through, especially the midfielders that get themselves into the kind of position that Sandy Robertson got themselves into that day?
Yes and no, it depends on your generation. I think you guys, definitely, is he going to be a Durant who will step on, or is it going to be a Derek Ferguson who has the world at his feet? Who Derek Ferguson being a phenomenal player, but his body lets him down and his mind lets him down in big ways. But if you're the 70s, you're looking at it and you've seen Parlane, Johnson, Con. You've seen it. You've seen young players come in and sort of dominate for years. So I've also seen Alex Sahara's, Ian McDougall's, guys that come in and look the part for 3, 6, 9 months, and then disappear just as quickly from whence they came. So you're taking it for what it is, which way it's going to go. You suspect they aren't going to be a Durant or a Ferguson. You always hope it's going to be. But let's face it, we're also laughing at this point across the city, because every young forward they have is the new Kenny Dalglish.
Yeah.
Jerry Craney being, they decide to call him at this point, being the latest Kenny Dalglish reincarnation. And they never ever did it. So you don't know where he's going to go. You're just thankful for what he turns up and does in that day. At this point, it is short-termism. The pressure is on, but this is a Rangers team at this point, and there is quite a journey to go in these 4 games. At this point, you're thinking, when the pressure's on, even if they're not playing well, and it's really down to the wire, they get the job done.
Yeah.
They've earned a degree of trust from
yes
at this point.
Yeah, that's probably fair. They get the job done in midweek as well at Ibrox, home to Dundee United. A few players back, including Richard Gough, Mo Johnson, Mark Walters. But again, John, it's still a 1-0 win. This time an early goal, a low header by Ian Ferguson. Bit more fluency about the performance, but again, I go back to that. It's 1-0. And this is something that definitely has dried up, along with some drop points. Rangers are not scoring goals the way that they were, and the way that Aberdeen are. They are filling their boots at this minute in time. You only need one more than the opposition, I know that, but was with any of that a concern, the fact that, right, these 2 games, 2 1-0s, we're just going to crawl our way over this line?
No, because you're winning.
Yeah.
It's easier to chase than it is to lead, by and large, as we will discover later. So when you've got a carrot in front of you, you're chasing it down. And we saw Celtic like this for many years, actually, who would rattle in goals when they were needing snookers. I think one year McGinn even said that if the league started at Christmas, they'd have won it. There is that difficult to lead from the front. It really is a tough shift, and when you've seen the thing, so anyone is taken, and all we have to do is win our last 4 games, and we've ticked 2 in the, perhaps only 3, but all we have to do is keep winning. Aberdeen, as well as winning, need us to falter.
Yeah.
Which is, so if Aberdeen falter, they will get a pat in the back and say, well, you came from nowhere, you gave it a good shot. If we falter, it's how could you blow, I don't know, 7 points, 9 points?
7 it was at one point, yeah. Andy, any jitters from you or any memories of that Dundee United midweek game? Was it just the same as John, just keep winning, we need to do?
I think the Rangers support by this point are fairly in tune with what's required to win the league, and that it doesn't need to be fast-flowing, beautiful football to do that. I remember the Dundee United game being tight, and obviously it was one goal that did it. Diving header for Ferguson. I was nip and tuck, but I think the Rangers fans still believe that we were the better team. We had a better track record, and by and large, the squad and the players that were on the park had been there and done it already. So I wouldn't say there was jitters. There was the normal level of excitement tempered with fear of failure that you would get at this stage of the season when it's tight. It's nothing extraordinary is my memory.
I'll come back to you both on jitters and fear in a few minutes. So Smith is navigated those 2 first tests well, but he needs someone to do his old job. He doesn't have an assistant at this point. He wants Ray Wilkins. That's his first port of call, but for the reasons that Wilkins left, is why he's had to turn it down. He wants to stay in London. So he goes to Archie Knox, someone he knows very well from many setups through the years throughout Scottish football, speaks to him on an almost daily basis as 2 friends, meets him in Carlisle, and Knox immediately agrees to come and take the job. Small problem, Knox is already an assistant manager elsewhere, and that's for Alex Ferguson at Manchester United, who were preparing to go to a European Cup Winners' Cup final that week. Ferguson was apoplectic. I know that's hard to maybe picture that reaction. He didn't speak to Smith for a long time. They made up, of course. But Andy, there's something in itself, and I know Knox will have. He has this great relationship with Smith. I'm sure he has. The club at heart as well, has never been here, but there'll be an affinity there. But you're in a Manchester United coaching setup with a European final the next week. So this is the Thursday or the Friday. You're playing on the Wednesday. Imagine Dave Voss a few weeks ago just getting up and leaving, or any other Rangers assistant manager through the years, whether there's a European final within 7 days. And especially to come from Manchester United up the road. There wouldn't be long left in this window of having this remarkable draw with England. I think this is really coming to an end now. But that whenever I come back to this story, it still surprises me that it wasn't a case of, look, Walter, I'm very interested, but let's talk in the summer. The conversation was very quick and it was done.
So throughout this series, Martyn, we've tried to paint a picture and convey the position that Rangers find themselves in the food chain at this point in time. And I probably over-egged that pudding because I keep going on about it, because in the context of today, it's mind-blowing. And there's two events that kind of position it for me. One was the fact that Duncan Ferguson became the record signing in Britain when he signed for us in 92, 93, something like that. 93.
Yeah.
And the other one is this, where we effectively take the Manchester United assistant manager in the scenario that you've just painted a week before a major European final, away from Alex Ferguson, albeit it's not Alex Ferguson with the legacy he has behind him now. He's still building at that point in time. But Man United, if you went to England at that point, somebody says, who's the biggest team in England? It was Man United at Liverpool. Liverpool were the most successful, but Man United, for all their travails at that point in time, are still probably considered the biggest club in England. And so for that to happen, I'm sure there's a bit of money involved in Archie Knox's side of it, but it wasn't just down to that. It was the lure of Rangers, it was the challenge for the fight, and it was Walter Smith's probably, the personal connection there where he's probably said to Archie, look, we're in a position here and we need you as soon as possible. We can't wait till next season, because in normal circumstances, anywhere else in football, that appointment would have been put on hiatus until the next until the next pre-season, 100%. So it's a statement, Martin, and it really, really illuminates what we've been trying to say throughout this series to date, that Rangers were the biggest club in Britain. It's a long shot, but it was a measurable distance.
Yeah, it's a distance that's shocking. The irony here, John, is that when we have been able to attract talent from down south, English talent, to be fair, not someone who we're effectively teasing back home, but it's been the lure of Europe, which they couldn't get. But as I said, Rangers had not been troubling finalists. They know that the engravers of European trophies, weren't really bothered by us. And Knox is a chance to do something here, to be part of something. And there's no long agonising discussion. It's pretty quick and up the road. It's a remarkable story, I think.
To me, it was surprising at the time. It's still surprising because Wilkins makes sense. When you're a manager, you want someone who's slightly different to you. I would always argue, to give you a different perspective.
Yeah.
Smith and Knox appear very, very similar. I could be wrong. I don't know the ins and outs, but it doesn't. You also got, on the other hand, I always thought that Ferguson wanted rid of Knox, and that's why it happened so quickly. In the early days back then, because it did happen with significant haste. You do have to put into perspective that Archie Knox, I think I'm right in saying, must have a European medal too with Aberdeen. Cup winner.
This is true, yeah.
3 and a Super Cup.
Yeah.
So he's been there, done it. Man U are a big name. It's only 12 months just over that Fergie had the sign with it's time to go straight for them.
Mm.
And I guess appeals to me and older guys is it's the lure of Rangers. I'm guessing he must be a Rangers man at that point, and yours invariably only come once. Smith had the chance maybe with McLean and thought it was gone. I think if you're Archie, you're thinking, Luragan back to Scotland, you don't know his family circumstances. There is, who knows? They don't come knocking on the door very often, and usually it's only once. So use it or lose it. It's the only thing I can come up with, Martin.
I think that's fair.
Factual.
I think that's fair, and especially it would have been drummed into guys of that generation that Rangers would only come once, and if they come, you have to go. But it's the timing that even though he has been there and done it with Aberdeen, it's still it's next week. But somehow United cope without him, and they win the Cup Winners' Cup, and I think it's fair to say would do all right in the years that follow. But Knox was tempted by silverware as well, which of course we'll get to in a moment. Scotland were in San Marino for a European Championship qualifier the week before, where Richard Gough was sent home, feeling unwell. He went back to his bed and was effectively had to be taken into hospital, where he was diagnosed with hepatitis from food poisoning. You've got Kuznetsov out, you've got Stuart Monroe out, Trevor Steven, and they're out long term. You've got a few players with niggles, lacking match fitness, John Brown, Ian Durrant, Ali McCoist. This is the last thing that Smith and Knox needed. But
Andy?
It's just incredible. This injury and illness record, Andy, is getting kind of ridiculous. The loss of Goff, even though we're ahead, Andy, right? And I know what you're saying. Just keep the points rattling on, but we've lost Butcher. Now Goff's out for the rest of the season, along with the kind of players I've mentioned. This is a bit of a nightmare. This.
It became a bit of a running joke. In fact, it wasn't funny. It was as if there'd been a curse placed upon us in terms of injury and illness for a long time. The Kuznetsov one's still very, very fresh in our mind at that point. We've covered that in a previous show where it was like your Christmas present broke after 20 minutes. And and at this point in the season, we're fairly used to adversity as a club, and we know that you can only moan so much about it because you have got an advantage of a tremendous squad relative to your competition. But this is testing us. It gets worse, but that's for later on the show. But this is testing us, and psychologically, you've got to pick yourself up as a support and as a team and say, right, well, we need to get through this. But I mean, it was a big loss on top of everything else we had. You've got to get on with it. And to go back to what I was saying about the fans and the support, kind of knowing that we've been here before, and you just need to keep going, and it's going to be tense, but you just get yourself through it. And much like we think of clubs like Real Madrid in finals, we knew how to do it when the backs were up against the wall. We just knew how to win. But you're starting to think, Christ, this is making it more difficult than it really needs to be. So it was more of the same, because the injury and illness record that Ibrox over the years that we've covered the last 3 seasons or so, when you look at players like Ferguson, Woods had it by this point. All this kind of stuff happened pretty regularly, and it wasn't just down to the suspicions that the medical and training regime at Ibrox wasn't as advanced as some of our European competitors. There was a lot of bad luck involved.
Yeah, there was a wee bit. Okay, so penultimate game of the season, Fir Park, the bank holiday weekend, first bank holiday weekend in May. Very warm day, very sunny, bright day. Boys, you were both at Fir Park that day. Rangers are 2 points ahead. Basically, worst comes to the worst, surely, is that Rangers and Aberdeen, who are at home to St Johnstone that day, both win. Probably win by a narrow margin, let's be honest, given the way Rangers were winning games. Which meant that if that happened, if it was the same kind of scoreline, Aberdeen come to Ibrox on the last day, they need to win 5-0. Now, Aberdeen can beat Rangers. They can. But they're not going to beat Rangers 5-0. So, but we could all but win the league, John. But there's a chance that it could be won outright. That if Rangers win, Aberdeen don't beat St Johnstone. It's a title day. So for all this tension that we've talked about and the bad luck with Goff and the upheaval, you are going to Fir Park on that Saturday afternoon with the outside possibility that Rangers could win the league today.
I do not remember this as being a potential title winning day. It was. Memories of back then was it was another game to win to get through. I don't remember there being a buzz that we're going to win the league that day or anything close. But I don't know why there wasn't, because personally, this is a real roller coaster this next 7 days. I didn't believe Aberdeen were going to continue in this run. Eventually, I'm right, but they were in such one of those runs. I thought eventually the pressure will get to them, and they'll suddenly realise if we keep winning, we could win the league. And at that point, I think they would panic. And I thought it might be near, but it never crossed my mind we were going to win the league at that Fir Park. It was just another one. And Motherwell were in a huge high at this point, because they're going into a Scottish Cup final, having done the unimaginable, which is winning a Cup semi-final replay against the Old Firm, which is almost, I think at this point, just doesn't happen. and probably, I don't know when the last time it would really happen, 20 odd years before, when maybe Hibs beat us. So they've went and beat Celtic, and they've got former Rangers players. Actually, we should maybe have drafted some of them back, playing out their skin at this point. Cooper, I think Russell's doing them a turn. Ian Ferguson maybe coming on. I mean, Motherwell are on a high, and they've played for cup final places.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're playing very well, as you mentioned. They're fluent, and Cooper is having an absolute renaissance. And it was, I think, the whole of Scotland was kind of delighted to see it. Well, most of Scotland. But Motherwell, it's a tough place to go, Andy. It's never been a particularly kind of free-flowing ground, or where Rangers are scoring loads of goals, I don't think. And it's often caught us out as well. Your memories of travelling to Motherwell that morning?
I remember this vividly, but slightly different for John in that I felt there was a bounce in the step of certainly on my bus and going in. It was a glorious day. I think we all knew we could win the league that day. I don't think we expected to win the league that day, but it was, it was that kind of vibe where you celebratory and waiting. And Motherwell at that time, my pal played for Motherwell under 16s, and Tommy McLean, Tom Forsyth in the dugout, and Tom Forsyth used to take him, and he used to tell me stories about Tom Forsyth and the way he treated them that would make your toes curl in terms of brutality of the regime at Motherwell and how hard and unforgiving they were to the under 16s. And I often remember thinking, did they do the first team? Because as John alludes to, they were a really, they were a potent team at that point. Ed Cooper, the players you're mentioning, Ferguson, and most of all, Dougie Arnott, who for some reason against Rangers turned into Romario most of the time. And he was absolutely a thorn on our side more than once.
Can't think why. Yeah.
So this day I remember it in bright colours, and I don't remember much about the game. I've looked back on YouTube and I can see what happened, but I just remember it being a catastrophe and walking out that ground. The difference between walking in and walking out was seismic because, as I say, there was a bounce going in, going out. It was funereal. It was like a funeral. It really was, because the reality was dawning on us that we're getting into next week and we're really going to have to turn some around because you've got all these injuries, you've just that performance.
Starts to become a problem, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you've both mentioned about the Rangers just doing it when the going gets tough, and this is what this Rangers team has done. They've done it now for, basically 4 out of the last 5 years, really. Ian Ferguson said of this game that it's the worst Rangers performance when the chips were down, when it mattered. This is the worst Rangers performance he can really remember. And it was, the first half was nervy. John Phillippen scored a couple of OGs against Rangers, but there was nothing fortuitous about his strike that put Motherwell in from a Davy Cooper corner. Rangers a wee bit better in the second half, but Ali Maxwell was in fine form that would continue into that cup final, would make his name, really, wouldn't it, as Motherwell won the cup against Dundee United. Remarkable for a goalkeeper to be man of the match in, a 4-3 win, but he was, and he made some cracking saves that day as well. But Rangers were awarded a very soft penalty, John, by Andrew Waddle, not a sentence that I imagined having to write or say, because I don't think it happened very often. But here's a chance to get back in the game. And Mark Walters, who had taken many penalties, big penalties, Old Firm penalties against Europe's best, and scored them very nicely. And there's maybe a sense of the pressure. His body shape's wrong. He's leaning to the left, which means the ball sails up to the right. And there's a sense that it's maybe just not the Rangers' day. Aberdeen are 2-1 ahead at home to St Johnstone. And Rangers are done on the counter. Dougie Arnott, Andy mentioned, a brilliant counter-attacking goal, acres of space. Now, at this stage, Rangers 2-0 up, Aberdeen 2-1 up. Rangers are still in control, which means they've gone to this final day at home to Aberdeen just needing a draw. Still, you can see it. You can see it on the video. Knox especially, but I think Smith as well, urging Rangers forward for reasons that are not particularly clear to me, to be honest, because unless Rangers score 3 goals in 5 minutes, it's not going to change the situation. Now's the time to shut up shop. But incredibly, Motherwell score again. It is a carbon copy, almost, on the break. The holes and the gaps are even bigger. And John, the goal that probably changes the season, and not in the way that many fans, pundits, Aberdeen players, Rangers players may have imagined at the time, because this changes everything. Aberdeen are now top of the league, incredibly. You boys, even whether you believed it or not, could have been celebrating a league title that day, and now all of a sudden Rangers are second.
Yeah. I mean, I was at the opposite. Well, I was at the end where Dougie Arnott scored his 2 goals. And I still see Walter's penalty landing on the moon or somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, it just went, and I mean, Arnott's 2 goals are fantastic. I mean, Dougie Arnott could play a bit, and if Scott Booth was getting plenty of caps, I've no idea why Dougie Arnott couldn't. And that's not me saying Dougie Arnott should get caps, but
Yeah,
he was a decent player. I mean, he was, and he was good in that Motherwell team. You know, for a small guy, he made it. I got why we were chasing the game, because there was no guarantees Aberdeen weren't going to score again. But I mean, coming out and for all of that week, yeah, I'd moved from 77, 78 to 78, 79. And I was thinking, and I was thinking, this is where all this hubris of loads of money, Champione, this is too easy, laughing at Celtic, we're just going to blow this. This is when fate has decided, actually, you've had it too good, we're just going to kick you right in where it hurts. And that was my frame of mind. I mean, we can talk through it, but it just felt like the weight of the world on top of you. Go to bed, pull a duvet over. You don't want to go to work that week. I was in Edinburgh, so it'd be Hibs fans laughing. I don't think there was any Tims at that point, but you could sense that, you could feel the vibe that, I mean, Celtic were rubbish and were a disaster. But disaster if the other lot throw it away in such spectacular fashion. It does give you a warm glow inside. And I thought that's it. Because it's all right grinding out 1-0 victories and when you're ahead.
Yeah.
But coming back after all of this, and I mean, it was a disaster at Motherwell. I mean, we didn't play well. As you say, Dr. Andrew Waddle gave us a penalty, which I assumed had to be a stone waller until I saw it. And recently, because he never gave you in. I mean, he used to give penalties when handballs outside the box against us. And you just think, and then when he goes up, when you get a penalty from him, you think, okay, maybe this is our day. Puts it past him, and you're thinking, well, if he gives you a penalty and you still miss. And then Arnott it's almost like it is watching a replay. If you 2 goals back to back, the second and third, you would say, you're showing me the second goal again.
Absolutely incredible. It really is. Andy, I'm keen if both of you any of these recollections or similar recollections. There is, surprise, a time capsule on the next game we're going to talk about, and David and I had done that years ago. But he remembers people, his dad's pals, supporters club, starting to after this afternoon, after that match. Well, this is what you get when you replace someone that big with a number 2, with an assistant. That's when you don't show the ambition to go and get a big name. Can anyone remember any of that chat that Saturday evening or the Sunday?
Me personally, I cannot. For the simple reason is, couldn't accuse Smith of anything because he was lucky to play 11. He couldn't pick any more than the 11 players that were fit.
That's rationality from football fans, so you know what that's like, John. It's that instant.
There might have been in other buses.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody wanted to talk about it.
Yeah.
It was probably one of the quietest buses back. You know, don't put the radio on. We don't want to hear the scores. We don't want to hear nothing. There'd just be the eye contact with the coach driver as you get on of Aberdeen have won, and the bus was silent. I don't think at that point there were recriminations of anything. It was just pig sick. I think it was the overwhelming emotion and absolute silence.
Andy, can you remember anyone just doing that very reactionary? Well, this is
No.
what we get. I knew this would happen.
No, I can't. I can't remember anything. I think there was shell shock. That's why. And as John alluded to, I think there was at least acknowledgement that the injury side, injury and illness side of things wasn't exactly helping. So I cannot recall anything of that nature at all.
Well, there was celebrations, understandably, in the Aberdeen dressing room once they had that third goal, because look, that injury list, stuttering form, surely it's only going to go one way now. Aberdeen are top of the league; they only need a point at Ibrox. But this is where pressure. We've talked about pressure in all 4 shows covering this season. This is where it changes the dynamic. Rangers have been creaking for weeks. Internal strife and basically holding on to that position that they'd fought so hard for over the winter. It was a defensive approach. That pressure's suddenly all off. Aberdeen had, as John's mentioned, it's easier when you're challenging, but their form was brilliant. 11 wins, 1 draw, and it had come from this very good 4-3-3. Not the norm in Scottish football at the time, but no burden of expectation. It was free-flowing. Alex Smith, manager, along with key pros, Alex McLeish, one of them, decided, no, we're going to go to this 4-4-2. We go to Ibrox because we only need a point. There's the negative thought starting right early in the week, and it grows and it grows. Ibrox is going under some renovation. Club deck is being built. The players are basically in porta cabins in the bills of the main stand, so they'll hear an echo. They'll hear quite a fair noise in there. David Robertson talks about being in that porta cabin, looking to Paul Mason because he could hear the Rangers support in early, thumping, singing, stamping their feet. And they looked at each other going, it's going to be pretty difficult here today, actually. Only one change for Aberdeen getting into the Rangers game. Theo Snelders was replaced by young Michael Watt, who had performed very well at Ibrox in the few appearances he'd made, the last 2 visits. But on the 11th of May, he clearly would not. But that is just the pressure. Can you remember, we'll talk about the game in a minute. Can you remember the build-up to it? I'm a lot younger, I know. But I would get stressed about Rangers results, and I'd get worried about big games and nervous at school and everything else. For whatever reason, I was serene that week. Just didn't think we weren't going to win. And if it was at Pittodrie, game's up. But I just felt we'll do it. They'll respond. We're at home. We need to win. And I felt good. Can you remember that? Can you remember the sports scene special on the Friday night sports scene, it used to be called, I think. It must have been about 40, 50 minutes long. It was a big preview, and it was so exciting. Because you don't really get league showdowns like this. You bring your radios, you'll be waiting on other scores, but here's a head-to-head. An incredible way to finish a season. I don't know. I was energized. I thought we'd do it, and I couldn't wait. Maybe still naive and youthful. Andy, can you remember that week?
I can remember the morning of the game, and the reason I remember it is because to put up a big tent for the BB, right? We put up a big tent at St Cuthbert's Church in Saltcoats, and without rambling on, it was a beautiful, beautiful day, and I jumped out of my bed, and the first thing I did was I put on that Admiral strip, that Rangers strip, because straight after this marquee was put up, I was off to the bus. And the thing that lives with me is that John mentioned earlier on about, Celtic fans kind of reflected glory of us blowing it, and I think that kind of goes for the whole of Scottish football all the time. We know it as Rangers fans that we are there, and we've seen it in recent years where if we fail, the whole of Scottish football rejoices in it. And that day I had that strip on, and there was an old GP went to this church, quite a posh church, and he said to me, never ever mention one word of football to me this, and he knew I was football daft, but he said to me, "Oh, this is the day that Rangers lose the league, isn't it?" And I thought, "You old bastard." And I said, "No, there's no chance today." And I remember, much the same as you, Martin, being absolutely energised. And I don't know if battle fever was a thing back then, but certainly that was what we were feeling. And there was a bit of a war footing. I think that's what I felt. You probably felt it. And certainly when you got in that ground that day, with half a main stand, remember, the club decks getting built at this point, the place was fearsome. So I think there was something in it.
John, your journey to the game.
Oh, that was a horrific week, I would have said. All the way through the week, I was negative. We'd blown it. This was going back to late 70s. What comes next? We're all going. And the week would get on. My girlfriend at that time, it was her brother's 21st birthday. It was going to be in the Saturday night of the Aberdeen game in Henry Africus, which bumped down on the Thursday into Friday night morning.
Where were you at the time?
Place to hold it. Wasn't anywhere. I was still. I did not watch the 40-50 minutes. I remember the day of the game. I was still so negative. I went to Finley's in Byers Road. You couldn't wear your colour, so I went home, changed into the top, went to the bathroom, and my father, who is very security conscious, had hooks on all the doors. I mean, we're top flat in a tenement. And this hook flipped down, and I was locked in the bathroom. I am looking to climb out windows. I'm pulling the door. Miraculously, for some reason, my sister had been up the town and came back early and let me down at 2:30. And she said, or 23, and she said something like, jokingly, "What you didn't lock yourself in there? You know, get a game." I gave her a mouthful, ran down the stairs, jumped the subway. Subway came. I was panicking. Got out at Copeland Road. I walked out, got onto Copeland Road, and then it just serenity. And I thought, we're doing this. I have no idea where it's come from. All week being negged. I just walked out onto Copeland Road from the subway, and I thought, we've got this. And I have no idea why I thought it. There was no... and I've spoken to other people. Some, like you, have been serene all week. I spoke to another guy who was been negative all week, got to the little Rangers club, turned to his mate and said, "We're winning today." There was something in the air, and it was probably, for me, it was the best domestic domestic atmosphere at Ibrox in my lifetime that day. I don't think it has been beaten except by European nights. It was electric. The team, the fans, the management. Because Murray had, get rid of Souness. We were always one. There was a real unity. It was backs to the wall. It was Zulu, whatever you want to call it. There just was this spiral in a weird way that we were not going to lose this. It was a phenomenal feeling. It was a phenomenal game. Atmosphere-wise, absolutely tremendous.
But that chimes, I think, with the feeling at the club that week. Ian Ferguson, who admits in his book, could be quite pessimistic before games. That's kind of where his mind went. But he said, not that day. I can remember sitting upstairs having a bite to eat with Coisty and saying to him, "We're going to win today. We're really going to do it," and totally believing, because the whole atmosphere just felt right. Mark Walters, very similar, said we're so deflated after the Motherwell game. We desperately wanted to play Aberdeen the following day. I honestly couldn't see past us winning. I've never seen a bunch of guys so fired up for a game in my entire career. I'd been playing for 10 years and I'd never witnessed desire and hunger like it. And this is what happened.
Walters wants to bring the ball down and take on Wright. Going for the early cross. There's Hateley. It's a magnificent goal for Rangers. 5 minutes from half-time, and Ibrox erupts. It's just about the first time in the match Mark Hateley's had the better of Alec McLeish. It was a delightful cross and a masterly finish. Hateley getting up again. McLeish didn't follow him that time. Here's Connor. Bringing up the line for Booth. The layoff was intended for McKimmie, but he's released Johnston. Hateley waits in the middle. He will look to be offside. Well, the referee's allowed the goal. And Rangers are 2 in front. Woods is celebrating, so too the Rangers supporters. Mark Hateley gets his second. And every eye now on the referee as the ball is out of play, waiting to see if Brian McGinley will bring this match to an end and make it formally Rangers Championship. There it is! Rangers have won the championship.
Right, gents, there's a lot to unpack here. Can we start with Mark Hateley, the hero of the day? We haven't really touched on him much over the course of these 4 shows because I wanted to give him his space at the appropriate moment. We know, unfairly criticised fans not understanding that he's not the one keeping McCoy out the team, Mo Johnson is. But before that day, Andy, he'd scored 13 goals, right? I mean, not insignificant, I don't think. This isn't a kind of Harold Bratback issue that the Celtic would have and turns up in that last day and kind of wins the league after being pretty garbage or whatever all season. It's maybe been a bit slower than people may have wanted, and it would certainly be slower than some of the seasons he would put in following this. But he's not been a disaster by any stretch of the imagination. But he comes good. We know all about the story here. I think it's the first time he came up against Michael Watt, who again had caused Rangers some problems at Ibrox before. He put a couple of real good shows in. He said he saw him in the tunnel looking lost. He thought he was a wee boy. He actually thought it was, he'd been a bit disparaging, but he said he thought it was one of the kind of ball boys or one of the youth players that Aberdeen had kind of brought just to be around. And he said to Gary Stevens, once we get in there, don't whip one in. Don't put a kind of zinger across. Put one right up in the air because I'm going to pretty much flatten that boy. And he did early on. And McLeish, other Aberdeen players who normally would have been all over Hateley said they didn't want to know. And he knew then there was only one team going to win. But fitting player, I think, to wrap this up because he had a hard time that season, unfairly.
The good old days when you could lay one on them. It was. It started the season on occasion like Bambi on ice. I remember his ball control was lacking. He was particularly fast, and there was huge question marks over him. But it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, and most importantly, it become more effective. So even when he wasn't particularly playing well, or he wasn't aesthetically, glowing in terms of what he was doing on the park, he was still being really effective. We spoke a couple of weeks ago about the League Cup final. I mean, he wins that. It doesn't win a ball in the air with Elliott, but that creates the goal. Yeah. Stuff like that he was doing week in, week out, and that's why Souness then Smith were picking him ahead of the other two, McCoy and Johnson as a combination. It was Hateley and another. And by this point in the season, we've had the disastrous Motherwell result, but he was fearsome. He was becoming fearsome at times, and he was definitely fearsome in the air. And that was the one thing that for day one, he always had that ability. So when I'm saying his ball control and his ability to run with the ball was pretty apparent, he could still head the ball. His heading was always fantastic. And you mentioned McLeish there. McLeish is the nemesis, a player like Hateley, of Hateley's style. And this was his day. And I mean, we're talking about turning points for Smith and for Rangers in that run, but it's probably the turning point for Mark Hateley because he was winning the Rangers fans over, and I think most of us has accepted the fact that he was the number one striker because he was so integral to the style of play. But he came back the season after just to jump forward on the back of that confidence and belief that he knew he now had around the support and in the club, and he was like, it was like fucking Marco van Basten when he came back, and the assassin's hairdo is now in full flow and stuff like that. So this game is integral to the history of Mark Hateley for Rangers because it was a major turning point where you never ever are decried after you have a game like this. Never.
John, the first goal was absolutely brilliant. It was one of the best headers I think I've ever seen at Ibrox. The second goal is a mistake, and it's a mistake that Hateley has targeted. He has prepared the way for Michael Watt to spill that. Slight hint of offside always in that second goal, but that's the as we've spoken to Hateley a couple of times on this network, and mentally strong I know he's had to be mentally strong to get through this season, I think. But on that day, he's winning those mental battles with McLeish, but with Watt, sometimes even before a ball's really kicked. He wins the day, doesn't he? It's him.
Yeah, he's went through a roller coaster season because Andy alluded he started off with question marks. I thought he came strong through the New Year period, and then he gets sent off at Parkhead, and then he was maybe, what would you say, slightly damaged goods when Souness went, because he was Souness's boy.
Yeah.
And when the fans are turning against Souness and he's gone, there's a bit of, going to take him with you, aren't you? Yeah, I think, because you're assuming it goes. But that day, it just was. I was surprised at how it all unfolded because, like you recounted, Watt had good games at Ibrox. It wasn't his first game against us. There, you might have thought it would happen if it was a boy thrown in. This was his first game in the Lions' Den, whatever. He'd been there and he'd done it, and he had played well. So I was genuinely astonished. But Haley was on it. I mean, that second goal, there was some weird refereeing decisions that day. I think McGinley gives a pass back when it isn't a pass back against it. And it's Jock Brown trying to force the linesman's flag up for offside.
I think he was. Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about commentaries here, but he's almost shouting, "Get your flag up."
Does look a wee bit offside, to be fair, but yeah. Again,
because I think we'd have got the second because
I think we would.
They were done.
They were done. David Robertson talks about McLeish talking in 5 minutes, literally. Right, that's another 5 minutes. We'll get 5 minutes to half time, and he said just as he said that, the ball goes out to Waters and Big Haley scores, and that's it. Robertson says the way that Rangers team was in sync with the support. There was no way back to Aberdeen. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact, though, that Peter van de Ven and Heelhuis had great chances at 0-0 early in that first half. Chances that the week before they would have burst the net. It's pressure. That's what changes. When you start thinking negatively, as Aberdeen did at the start of that week, people tighten up. And those were huge moments. Other huge moments for Rangers, this injury thing being an absolute nonsense now. Tam Cowan breaks his leg. Ian Durrant has to go and play at left back. John Brown later in the game, his Achilles snapped as he was told it would do. Archie Knox talks about being at Ibrox, I think about 10:30 that morning, and Bombers already going nuts, shouting at the walls and everything else. But yeah, he knew he wouldn't see the game out, but still did it anyway. But yeah, Aberdeen go back to the 4-3-3 once they're 2-0 down. It's too late. It's too late. They do look good, but by that point, it's kind of done. Guys, we'll love a bit of counterfactual because it's fun. If Dougie Arnott does not score that goal, that second goal for him, that third Motherwell goal, I don't think Rangers win the title. We were hanging on. The Ibrox that you talk about would not have been like that. It would have been tense and nervy and sensing, oh God, we are, the momentum is not with us. And I think it would have been a completely different day. Easy to say, none of us know for sure. But the reason Rangers put that performance in is they've had that week. The players all testify to it. They were determined beyond belief to put their bodies on the line because they were behind. They'd been hanging on for dear life for weeks and they were free. And the fans, I think, Andy, responding exactly that way. There's, what can you link it to? We've just, as we record, just finished an incredible European run in 21-22. But those second legs at Ibrox in the quarterfinal and the semi-final, being 1-0 down, the pressure's kind of off. You have to go for it. You have to be brave. And I think there's maybe some similarities with those Ibrox nights that we just had and that Ibrox there from team and support. That goal, everyone thought it changed it for Aberdeen's benefit, but I think it changed it for Rangers.
Do you know, Martyn, you've convinced me because the shackles did come off that day, and that flip of psychology. I mean, you spoke about Alex Smith, Aberdeen manager, kind of changing a wee bit why the way Aberdeen had been playing. That was probably in the thinking as well. It was do or die, and you don't have do or die when a draw will do, and that probably was more significant than probably we realised at the time, and certainly that I realised at this point. So kudos to you, Martyn. That's why you're the boss.
John, you're going to surprise me here, aren't you? You thought Rangers would win anyway because it's Rangers, but
what I would say is I think the only way Aberdeen would have won it is if they had scored in the last 15, 20 minutes. I think if they'd scored earlier than that, I think we'd have come back at them from somewhere. It was a bit like Helicopter Sunday. The only way we could ever win that is if Celtic were defending a lead. Because if they were at Fir Park and it was 0-0, they would have been going for it the whole game. But when you get something defend, the late sucker punch would get you. I'm not sure, having watched Aberdeen that day, that if they'd got a goal through, say, Van de Ven had scored or whatever early on.
Sorry, I mean, if Dougie Arnott doesn't put that
third but even if Dougie Arnott, we're going for a draw, charge, Aberdeen at some point have to score for us to lose it. What I'm saying is, unless they score in the last 20 minutes, we would have the chance to come back at them. And there is a mental strength which they showed they don't have. I'm not saying which way it would go, but if Aberdeen had scored early and it hadn't scored one of his 2 goals, we would still have had 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Not saying Walter would have got the tactics right. He might not even have the same bench, because it really was all together now. Because he put Durrant and McCoist on the bench, who were not fit, and left out Hustra, who had been playing decent, but he went for his go-to guys. Brown's going to collapse. Durrant's not there. Fit. McCoist's not ready. And you look at that back four, what on earth the tactics were. Because Gary Stevens plays in just about every position.
He does, yeah.
But why is he even moved from right back?
But you get that players putting their bodies in the line and everything else and playing whatever position when you have no other choice. And my point being, Rangers going into that game top of the league, well, you do have a choice. You can convince yourself, but we're still there. We're still there, even though the traffic is only going the one way. And Aberdeen's change, which I think is crucial. Now, Aberdeen didn't need to change, and I think questions about their mentality anyway, I think are valid, because even with the third Motherwell goal, they can still say, well, see that 4-3-3 that's got us 11 wins out of 12 and I think 26 goals in that time? We're not changing. We're going to win because Absolutely. We're in form. And they didn't have to change, but they did, and that probably speaks to something else. No pressure, no diamonds, wrote Thomas Carlyle once upon a time. And this season, it has been about pressure. It's been ridiculous, actually, at times. But the Rangers team leave Ibrox that day and that season with... They are a diamond by that point. They have come through some incredible tests. They've won an Old Firm Cup final after the week from hell. They have put together the best run under Souness after he was causing them internal nightmares. You've got 2 players, McCoist and Haitley, going through their own personal trauma. And then in this final day, putting bodies on the line, playing out of position, anything to get the win. And I think it's not just about 98-91. What they came through that season, Andy, I think builds a team, builds something in terms of character that's going to serve Rangers well for a few years to come.
Aye, so much what I'm saying about Haitley happened to a lot of members of that squad and that team in Walter Smith. It was a case of an acid test was passed. And I think, like anything in life, when you do something that's pretty spectacular and difficult to achieve, it gives you tremendous confidence to move forward and do other things, because you look back on that experience and see yourself, well, I managed that and I did that, or I got through that test. That's how resilience is built. It's not just something that you buy or you switch on. You've got to earn resilience because experience gives you it. And your thing about pressure and diamonds is spot on. Well, it's not yours, but we took that into the next season. No question about it. And it was a foundation stone upon a foundation stone, if you know what I mean, because this could have collapsed the whole 9-in-a-row legacy. But it's the most severest of tests, and we passed it. And we talk about turning points. It's obviously a turning point, but they took something from it, as you say. It was used as fuel and as belief and as proof positive that you can overcome. And that's really, really powerful when you add it into the mix of what was happening at the Rangers, and we're going to spend something like 7 million the next season, funded by Stephen. But when you add that into the mix, it's pretty potent.
John, this was a huge day. It shattered Aberdeen. They would never be back. And seriously, Celtic are miles away. Means that Rangers will not really have a challenge that goes beyond February for 5 years. It keeps this run of successive titles. This is the first time we've won 3 in a row since, the 30s?
Yep.
Now, that's going to have a bearing on where Rangers' focus goes, because, we know what's coming down the line. There is a wonder about what happens if that didn't turn out that day. What happens to Walter Smith's career if that doesn't happen that way? Are Rangers freer because they don't get themselves involved in this succession or successive titles thing, that they can maybe free themselves up easier when Europe starts to become a bit of a problem later on? I don't know, but I in the scope of all the whole story here, I don't know there are many more pivotal days in positive and negative ways. I think this changes so much, this one.
It is. As I say, domestically, it was at Ibrox. It's the best atmosphere. It is one of the greatest games ever I've seen. I think it's one of the top games I've been to on that level. You can say it both ways. I do think there is whole sequence does have a bearing. I don't think it's at this point.
No.
I think maybe if we'd lost 93, 94, it would have freed us and made us make more radical decisions then. At this point, I don't think we're thinking 9, but we're certainly...
Well, we're not. We don't have a thing to talk about. That's the thing. This isn't in the mind.
I don't think it's going to be any less than 6.
Yeah.
To be honest, because Aberdeen are bust, Celtic are beyond bust, and there's nobody else. And this is the time when we've been at our weakest. Management change, injuries, blown a huge lead in the league, and yet we've turned it on. We've turned the corner, and as you say, this is. I wouldn't say it's the game, because there's a couple more, maybe 2 or 3 more that appear in 92, which really cement the whole team together.
Yeah,
and I would argue the cup semi-final.
Yeah, there's
the
definitely
game. But this is definitely the first real test. We should have crumbled. Look, there is no reason when you look at our team, look at their team, you look at the fitness, no way should Aberdeen not have beaten us that day, because they were the form team, they were the fit team. We were in fumes.
Yeah,
absolutely. And yet, I think it doesn't happen often enough. When we as a club, and I mean the management, the team, and the support, and the board are all in unison, we're pretty much unbeatable.
Yeah.
Having those 4 in alignment is almost impossible.
Yeah. but it's big. Yeah. And the reason that as I said, the reason I think this team were able to come through is when you look at the season as a whole, everything that's going on inside the club, outside, the trials that they've had to go through. It's been a tumultuous season. But it makes characters. And that came through in the end. Aberdeen haven't gone through those trials. Nowhere near it. And it, you know, it did create a diamond in the end. Thank you, gents. You'll be back in a couple of weeks where Walter Smith is in a bit of trouble. But he comes out of it all right. But look forward to speaking to you then. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Martyn.
Thank you, John.
No, thank you.
The history of the world is but the biography of great men, wrote Carlyle, and his great man theory of history is so often applied to the explanation of sport and achievement because we have this insatiable need for heroes. There have been few more dominant personalities at Rangers than Terry Butcher, and arguably none more so than Graham Souness, but the decline and departure of that overpowering presence allowed for the emergence of quieter leaders in Walter Smith and Richard Gough, who would ultimately become more successful. The mental strength and inner character of Ali McCoist and Mark Hateley was tested to the limits, but it's hard to argue that one of the most explosive striking partnerships in the club's history would have been forged quite as tightly without it. In the longer view of the season, however, the power and influence of those great Rangers men is diminished as the footballing landscape began a transformation well outside the range of their agency. English football's time as the sick man of Europe was over. Manchester United's win over Barcelona in the final of that Cup Winners' Cup was something of a false dawn in terms of renewed dominance of continental competition, but it was a stark reminder to any big English talent that not only did they have access back to the biggest stage, but they could actually compete there. Despite all the promise, Rangers didn't get close to maximising their opportunity as the biggest British contender in those years of exile, and the humiliation in Belgrade only served to underline that. But it was that dramatic night for England in Turin the previous summer that kick-started the real change, and it was the genesis of a marketing idea that would leave Rangers and Scottish football in its slipstream. The autumn of 1991 saw the formal agreement for the new FA Premier League, and British football would never look the same again. The significant challenge from across the border was further compounded by the increasing realisation around the impact of that UEFA decision in 1988 on foreign players. One problem with that law was that it was wholly illegal, and as it was, in contravention of the European law on freedom of movement of labour. It would take until the Bosman case of 95 for this to be recognised, but the window in between its implementation and withdrawal could not have come at a worse time for Rangers. They immediately placed caps on any further ambition to tackle Europe by bringing in the best talent the Rangers could afford in order to play a style that could be consistently competitive. By the time it was lifted, football was almost a different sport. The same external opportunities and decision makers that created conditions for the revolution to take root were now shutting it down at the key moment of its development. Although few would agree at the time, the Rangers revolution was slowing towards its natural end. Ironic then, that almost immediately after the Souness era came to a close, one where he tried to mould and bend Rangers into something less Scottish, Rangers were forced to become more Scottish than ever before. Until next time, bye for now.